everyone. Welcome to this conference hosted by MS Focus, the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation. I'm your host, Kimani Hendricks, Multimedia Communications Coordinator for MS Focus, and today Dr. Herb Karpatkin will be answering your physical therapy related questions for the next hour. Before I introduce him, I just wanted to let our attendees know how to ask questions, because you can throw them into the Q&A or the chat box right away if you're on Zoom. If you prefer to ask your question directly to Dr. Karpatkin, you can use the raise hand feature in Zoom as well. We just ask that you remain muted until we acknowledge you. But if you are watching from the Facebook live stream, you can just type your questions into the comment section below. Herb Karpatkin received his master's degree in physical therapy from Boston University and a doctorate in neurology from Rocky Mountain University. He is board certified in neurology and geriatrics clinical through the American Physical Therapy Association and is a certified MS clinical specialist through the Consortium of Multiple Sclerosis Centers. He has held clinical posts at Rusk Institute of Rehabilitation Medicine, Burke Rehabilitation Hospital, the International Multiple Sclerosis Management Practice, and academic posts in the physical therapy departments of Touro and Hunter colleges. He has presented extensively both nationally and internationally on physical therapy and multiple sclerosis, and has published articles on MS in the Journal of Neurologic Physical Therapy, Archives of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, International Journal of MS, and the Multiple Sclerosis International. He is the recipient of the 2015 American Physical Therapy Association Award for Excellence in the Neurologic Education and 2019 National MS Society Research Partners Award. In addition to continuing to be actively involved in patient care, he is a tenured associate professor of physical therapy at Hunter College, City University of New York, teaching courses in neurologic evaluation and intervention, psychosocial aspects of healthcare, and research design. Dr. Karpatkin, I'll turn it over to you for opening comments. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you very much, Kimani. It is, as always, a pleasure to have this opportunity to speak with persons about physical therapy and multiple sclerosis. I've been working in the field of physical therapy since the 1980s and specializing in multiple sclerosis since the 1990s. I am more than ever convinced that physical therapy and exercise is one of the most unused modalities that can help people with multiple sclerosis. And so I take every opportunity that I can to give talks like this. I am beyond grateful to the MS Foundation, not just for the amazing work they do for people with MS, but for giving me and my colleagues the opportunities to speak with MS patients. So with that being said, I will take any questions that come in now. Should I read the questions on chat, or do you want to read them to me? Just tell me how to proceed here.
Yeah, typically I would read them to you if that's okay. So our first question is from Ben. He asks, is there a certain criteria to qualify for a power wheelchair?
Well, when you say criteria, I don't know if you mean like a legal criteria in terms of it being paid for by insurance or Medicare. In terms of when do I recommend one, the question is, what do you need to do that requires the power wheelchair? The advantage of a power wheelchair, particularly for somebody with MS, is you can go much, much farther with less fatigue. And it really, for many of my patients who've switched to power chairs, it's opened up the world for them because they can now travel much farther than they could in a manual wheelchair. The disadvantage is that power wheelchairs are more complicated. They need to be charged. They're quite heavy. They weigh a couple 100 pounds, and they can break down. So most of my patients who get a power wheelchair always have a backup manual wheelchair. In terms of the legal criteria, it's probably going to vary from state to state. For insurance payment, it's usually going to require a physician and or a physical therapist or nurse to write a letter of medical necessity stating why the person specifically needs a power chair and why a manual chair would not be sufficient for them. And this would usually have something to do with the fact that they are unable to mobilize the chair, a manual chair on their own due to weakness or fatigue or something else.
I have a question from Elizabeth in the Q&A. She says, despite strengthening and stretching core, posterior chain, hip flexors, I often walked hinged forward at the hips, especially when fatigued. Do you have any suggestions?
Sure, that's actually a fairly common question that comes to me. And it's a good opportunity for me to point out that MS is going to affect everyone differently. So there's no, group of exercises that works for everyone. And to be honest, there's a patient I just saw a few days ago who had that identical problem and who does a lot of stretching and does a lot of core work, but still is bending forward at the waist or at the hips. And the reason for this is what she's not working out are the muscles that prevent the bending forward. And these are the muscles that extend the low back and also the muscles of the glutes. So the exercises that I recommend in cases like this all have to do with trying to extend at the waist, which can be simple as standing up and bending backwards from the waist and holding it. Another thing that I have people do is I have them stand against the wall with a pillow behind their back and then try to smash the pillow into the wall. And you hold that for extended periods of time. And what this does is it strengthens the muscles specifically that are too weak, and the weakness is what causes you to hinge forward. And if you don't address those muscles specifically, you're still going to hinge. You can do all the other work you want, but the exercise has to be specifically related to the problem you're trying to fix. So think about exercises that target the low back extensors, your back extensors, and your hip extensors, or your glutes, your muscles of your backside.
Julio says, I have balance issues. Does my prescription have to specifically need to say vestibular therapy?
Well, that's an interesting question. Balance is usually a combination of many, many issues. And as I said before, as I suggested before, you take two people with MS with balance issues, and they can have it for completely different reasons. The vestibular symptoms refer to symptoms having to related to a sense of equilibrium, a feeling like maybe your body is spinning or turning in space. So vestibular rehabilitation is a type of rehabilitation done by PTs, which specifically targets the vestibular system. And this includes both structures in the middle and inner ear and where those structures connect to in the brain. If your balance loss is related to vestibular issues, which often but not always occurs in MS, then you need vestibular rehab. Most PTs who treat people with MS should have training in vestibular rehab. So does your prescription specifically have to say it? I would say not. But if your physical therapist determines that part of your balance issue is due to vestibular loss, then you need to make sure that your physical therapist has training in treating that. If your balance problems are such that you feel yourself getting dizzy or having a sense of vertigo, or if you turn your head quickly and you lose your balance, or there's a lot of things rushing back and forth in front of your visual field, and that leads you to lose balance, you probably have a vestibular issue and you need somebody who can give you vestibular rehab.
Elizabeth says, I do rehab exercises daily, usually a mix focusing on multiple weaknesses, such as foot, hip, and balance. She says, is it better to focus on one area each day or to continue to do a little bit of everything each workout?
Well, the answer is yes. You need to do everything. The way that I do PT is I see what my patient's biggest problems are, and that is what I focus on. If you have specific exercises that are related to specific weaknesses or specific issues that you have, then those are the exercises you should do. And yes, you should be doing them every day. So the physical therapy for MS is different than, say, a sort of generalized training program where, Monday is arms day and Tuesday is legs day and Wednesday is balance day. You should really try to do a little bit of everything every day so your body gets the experience of it. Good question.
Aaron says, how many minutes of recumbent biking per week is good for the average MS person? And is there a strategy of adding more minutes after a while?
Oh, great question. So it's going to depend on how much you can tolerate. I usually try to build my patients up to 20 minutes 3 times a week. That may sound like a lot, but here are some shortcuts to get there. You don't have to do the 20 minutes all at once. And this is something we've been studying. We do a lot of research on this with my doctoral students at Hunter College. We found that actually, if instead of doing 20 minutes continuously, you did it in intermittent fashion. So 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off, 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off. As long as you get to 20 minutes, the effect on your body is going to be the same. So I usually try to get people up to 20 minutes 3 times a week. But if they have trouble getting to that, we just break it up into sections, do 3 times 3 minutes in the morning and 3 times 3 minutes in the afternoon. The main thing is getting in that total volume, the total dosage of work. Now, say you want to go beyond 20 minutes, you could do the same thing. You could add it in sections. So you could do 10 minutes, rest for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, rest for 5 minutes, and then do another 5 minutes. So the advantage of taking breaks is it allows you to do a greater volume of exercise.
We have a raised hand from Vincent. If you are there and can hear us, can you unmute? Hope he can hear me.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, Vincent.
Hi, how are you? I have a question for you. I have difficulty, particularly from getting up from a seated position, particularly a low or soft couch. Is there anything specific that you can recommend that I do?
Absolutely. So from a relatively high position, are you able to get up?
Yes.
Okay.
It's generally from a couch or a softer lower couch and watching television or whatnot. It's difficult.
Okay. So a couple of things. Okay. First, when you get up, there's a couple things you can do to make it easier for you to get up. First is you scoot to the very end of the seated surface. Second, you bend your knees so your feet are flat on the floor and your knees are over your feet. Then you have to lean as far forward as you can, even using a little bit of momentum. Okay, so this is optimizing the biomechanics to help you get up. Now, if it's still hard for you to get up, you're going to practice this in a very specific way. And it's going to sound a little bit weird, but I promise you it works. Start from a standing position and then sit down as slowly as you can. And you keep it slow by not by just falling down into the couch, but by slowly lowering yourself. And you do that by bending forward at the waist and slowly bending your knees. And ideally, you want to lower yourself all the way down without falling. If you can't do that, find a cushion and put that on top of where you're going to sit. So you want to make sure that you can control your descent all the way down. And you keep adding cushions until you can control the descent. Once you can do that, comfortably, then you take away one of the cushions and practice at that. So once again, first, make sure that you've scooted to the end, that your knees are over your feet, and that you shift your weight all the way forward. Bring your head over your knees. Second, if you're still having trouble, start from a standing position and lower yourself down. You use the exact same muscles. And third, if that's still too hard, put one or even two cushions underneath you so that you don't have to go as far a distance. And over time, remove one of the pillows. Okay. That's a really, Vincent, that's a really common question that I get. And it usually is a pretty easy fix once you practice this one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from an anonymous attendee. They ask, what are the best exercises for improving gait?
That's kind of an impossible question because it's going to depend on what the problem with your gait is. And in multiple sclerosis, the problems with gait can be very, very diverse depending on how the MS is expressing itself, but I'm going to try to answer it as best I can. First, the biggest problem that I see regarding gait and MS is over time, people walk shorter and shorter distances. Their MS gets worse, walking gets harder, so they walk less, which makes their walking worse. So they walk less, which makes their walking worse, etc. And so what I see is over time, over years, people say, well, 5 years ago, I could walk 2 miles. And then 2 years ago, I could only walk a mile. And 1 year ago, it was only a half mile. So the thing to do is to make sure the total amount of your walking stays as high as possible. Now, the next question is, how do we keep it high? I'm going to go back to what I was saying before. Don't think about doing all your walking at once. Take breaks. Say you go for a walk and after a half a mile or a quarter mile, you're starting to fade. You're dragging your leg. It's really hard. Stop, rest, recover, and then start again. So if you do it in segments, you can add more and more time. Another thing you can do is a lot of the limitations in MS walking for persons with MS have to do with fatigue and thermosensitivity. The hotter it is, the harder it's going to be for your nervous system to conduct nerve impulses through demyelinated nerves. So you need to keep yourself cool. And one of the wonderful things about the MSF is they provide cooling vests free, or at least, last time I spoke with them, they did. So I hope they still do. And you should, we're actually about to publish a study, me and my students from Hunter College, which showed that people who wore a cooling vest before walking walked a longer distance and walked at a faster speed than those who did not. So anybody with MS could probably benefit from a cooling vest. The third is figure out what it is that is making your walking harder. Probably one of the most common things that I see in persons with MS is that they have a foot drop, and the walking gets hard because of the foot drop. And the more tired they get, the worse the foot drop gets. So in addition to taking breaks, in addition to cooling, make sure you treat the foot drop. And the best thing you could do to treat a foot drop is to stretch your calf muscles out. Foot drops occur because your calf muscles are too tight. There's several reasons, but that's the main reason. So make sure you're really stretching the muscles of the back of your legs. as much as you can. Okay, so it's a bit of a general answer, but those are strategies that will help most people.
Another anonymous attendee says they have weak knees due to osteoarthritis and want to know what good exercises can work for them to strengthen them.
Well, osteoarthritis is really just it's a fancy word for arthritis. Your joints are swollen, and you probably have uh, asymmetrical weight bearing through your knees. And it's an interesting problem in MS because when I first started working with persons with MS, you didn't see a lot of osteoarthritis in the knees of persons with MS because you didn't see a lot of older adults with MS. Now I'm seeing quite a few, and arthritis is very often a disease associated with aging. And therefore now I'm seeing more and more older adults with MS and osteoarthritis. So what are we going to do about it? First, one of the best things you could do is keep walking. Okay? The persons who walk maintain their ability to walk. The persons who don't, they lose that ability. Plus, in addition to osteoarthritis, they start to develop osteopenia and osteoporosis, excuse me. Because they walk less, their bones get more and more brittle. So one of the most important things if you have osteoarthritis, in addition to the MS, is to keep your legs moving. If you can't walk, ride a bike. Strength training, which you do in standing, is probably a good idea because it puts weight through the bones. Okay? If you're a little bit overweight, that can make the osteoarthritis worse, so try to lose some weight. Drink lots of water because bones can get dehydrated as well. So, but again, the most important thing is to keep walking.
Yeah, I agree that, if you've got it, use it.
Yep.
So I do have a question from someone. They emailed it to us earlier. Her name is Maria. She says, will you discuss the B cell therapy for MS and the drugs that target these cells, ocrevus, ocrelizumab,
Sure.
Kesimpta?
Sure. So firstly, I'm not a physician. I'm not an MD. I'm a PT. But I do know a lot about these medications because almost all my patients are on them. The first thing I want to say is take them. Okay? There is zero doubt in my mind that the people who take the medications do much, much better than those who don't. When I first started working in MS, which was in the early 90s, these medications were not that plentiful and weren't used that much. And it was quite often I would see somebody diagnosed, and within 10 or 15 years, they'd be in a wheelchair. Now I don't see that anymore because they're on these medications. And the medications are preventing the disease from progressing. So these medications work at the level of the blood-brain barrier, the barrier between your bloodstream and your brain. In multiple sclerosis, it's theorized that there is a defect in the blood-brain barrier, allowing B cells to cross over. The B cells then start attacking the immune system, and that is the mechanism of MS. In the therapies that you're talking about, they change the ability of the B cells to cross the blood-brain barrier, or change the abilities of what happens to the B cells once they do cross the blood-brain barrier. So I'm a big fan of these. This has seemed, I have seen patients who 25 years ago would be in a wheelchair still being able to walk quite well after using these. The flip side is the patients who have, for whatever reason, refused to use these medications are not doing as well. And I know one heartbreaking story of a young man who decided to go off his D-cell medication. And he went from being ambulatory to needing a power wheelchair in a short amount of time. So I'm a big believer in these. Say what you want about big pharma, these medications have changed the world of MS.
I know that when Vincent asked how to get off of, low couches and what have you, maybe there's some more insight, or I don't know if this person just came in a little later, but an anonymous attendee says, how do they get off the floor easily?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a slightly different question. And as a matter of fact, there's a woman I'm working with right now, and her getting off the floor is a big thing for her. It's going to depend on what you can do when you're on the floor. What I do when I'm seeing somebody needs to get off the floor is we start a little bit higher than the floor. So if they have steps, I'll tell them to first, get on the third step. Can you get up from there? Okay, go down one step. Can you get up from there? And just to practice from progressively lower and lower surfaces. The other thing is, if they're on the floor, can they roll onto their side or on their stomach and get onto all fours and say crawl over to a chair or a sofa and get onto that, push themselves up from that. But again, it's going to depend on how the MS has impacted this person and whether the problems from getting up the floor are weakness in your arms, weakness in your legs, problems with flexibility. What I normally do when somebody has trouble getting up off the floor is I see them on the floor and see what strategy they use to get up. What most people learn right away is how to crawl up to a sofa or a countertop and pull themselves up from there.
Another anonymous attendee asks, is it important to stretch before PT exercises?
Well, I would say that stretching is a PT exercise. One of the most common issues in persons with MS is inactivity. That because of the disease, because of the fatigue, they simply don't use their body enough. And that's going to result in muscles, particularly the muscles in the backs of the leg, getting really tight. So any PT program that I give has a lot of stretching. Now, if you're going to be doing some type of physical activity like walking or balance training or stair climbing, you should stretch before, and you should also stretch after. The caveat is I don't think you shouldn't stretch so hard or so long that it actually takes energy away from the task you're trying to do. So what I normally tell my patients is you should be stretching throughout the course of the day. But if you have a physical task like walking or stair climbing or balancing or biking, just stretch for a minute or two before that.
I'm not entirely sure if Bob is saying that he has extensor spasticity and what to do about it, but that's the only thing that, and he says there's not really much information there.
Let's see here. Okay, extensor spasticity. Extensor spasticity refers to a tightness in the muscles called the extensors, usually in the legs. Okay, and it makes it hard to bend the knee. And that's a relatively common thing. I actually saw a patient last week who had spasticity in a muscle in her thighs called the quadriceps, which extend the knee, and it's a type of extensor spasticity. And it makes walking hard because you can't bend your knee. It results in a very stiff-legged gait. One of the things that I do for that is I make sure that those muscles are really well stretched out. I have her work a lot on trying to use the flexor muscles, the muscles that oppose the extensors. So I really work on learning how to bend the knee. And I also make sure that they're getting enough medication. The medication The most commonly used medication for spasticity is called baclofen. And if your extensor spasticity is so great you're having trouble walking, if you're not taking baclofen, you should speak to your doctor about it. And if you are, and you still have extensor spasticity, you may want to ask your doctor to give you a larger dose.
Another anonymous attendee wants to know if chair yoga is beneficial for MS, and if so, how?
Is chair yoga?
Mhm.
So that's a sort of it depends question. Any type of exercise is always going to be better than no exercise at all. And chair yoga is a type of exercise. So will it be a net positive for you? Absolutely. No question about it. But the thing about chair yoga is it's not really functional. Okay. So it'll make you healthier. It'll give you a lot of benefits, but it's not going to specifically help you with your balance or your walking. It'll help you with your overall fitness. Okay? It'll help you with your posture, relaxation, but doing chair yoga is going to get you really good at doing chair yoga. It's not going to generalize into walking or balance. So I have no problems with my patients doing it, but if they're having problems with walking, they should be doing walking. If they're having problems with balancing, they should be doing balancing. If they're having problems with strength, they should be doing strength training. If they have problems with flexibility, they should be doing flexibility training.
Another anonymous attendee wants to know what the easiest way to use a cane up and down the stairs is.
Okay, very common question. Okay, so the cane usually goes in the opposite hand of your weakness. So if you have a left-sided weakness, you hold the cane with your right hand. Okay, so if you are facing the stairs, you put your cane up first, okay, then your stronger leg, your left, whatever your stronger leg is, then your weaker leg. So it's cane, strong leg, weak leg. Cane, strong leg, weak leg. Going down, it's going to be the same. Okay. Cane, strong leg, weak leg. Cane, strong leg, weak leg. But you always hold the cane in the opposite hand of whatever weakness you have. It's also going to depend on whether you want to go up step over step or step by step. It's better to go over step, but that takes longer, more work because you're lifting your body a longer distance.
Someone else wants to know what are some balance exercises they can do.
So very generalized question. It's going to depend exclusively on what balance activities are hard for you. So normally I do a bunch of things when I see a patient. I do a balance test, which has a lot of different activities in it. So can you stand with your eyes closed? Can you stand with your feet close together? Can you stand with your feet close together and your eyes closed? Can you stand with your heel touching your toes? Can you stand with head turns? Can you stand with shifting your weight forwards or backwards? So I do a bunch of tasks and I try to figure out what activities challenge your balance. Whatever those activities are, that's what you need to be practicing. So if I ask somebody to balance with their eyes closed and their feet together, and they have trouble with it, that becomes their balance exercise. If they can do that comfortably, but they have trouble balancing, say, standing on one foot, then that's their balance exercise. They practice balancing on one foot. So the role of balance training is to figure out what balance task you have trouble with. Excuse me. Excuse me. And that's what you practice.
Miss Coleman wants to know what dosage of baclofen could she use if she's currently taking Celebrex.
I don't think there's any limitation to the amount of baclofen you take with Celebrex, but I could be wrong. That's a question for your physician.
Lisa,
Many of my patients have taken Celebrex and baclofen simultaneously without any bad effects.
Lisa wants to know if you see benefit doing exercises in water or pool specifically.
Yes and no. Um, so similar to what I've said before, if you exercise in water, you're going to really get good at exercising in water. It won't necessarily carry over to dry land. So once again, exercising in water will get you fitter. It will burn calories. It'll make you physically healthier, but it rarely carries over to overground activities, to activities, to activities on dry land. So a lot of my patients love exercising in the water, and I don't blame them. I love exercising in the water. I love going swimming. I love hanging out in the pool, but I don't think it's going to result in having a large improvement in your physical capacity. Okay? If you want to get good at walking, you have to practice walking, and you have to practice in a setting that's like real life, which is not being underwater.
Sure. If you're at SpongeBob, but question for you. How does PT vary for someone with primary progressive MS versus someone who just has a relapse?
Oh, that's a great question. My shorter answer is it's not. When I see somebody with MS, I'm going to see how the MS affected them, and that's going to dictate their therapy. I remember saying once before, I feel for every MS patient, I have to invent a new therapy for them, because everybody's going to be affected in a very singular way. Somebody who is in a relapse, if they're having a hard relapse, the therapy is probably not going to be that aggressive, at least for the first couple of days. If they're getting management for the relapse, say with steroids, then the therapy is going to get very, very aggressive. If it's primary progressive or even secondary progressive, and they are on an exercise program, I'm going to make sure they stick to that program really hard, because the exercise program is a type of medicine. Okay? The program, just like medicine, is the correct exercises are given at the right dose and at the right time. So it will differ in that if somebody's in the midst of a serious relapse, therapy is probably going to be pretty gentle. Otherwise, it's going to be as aggressive as they can tolerate on that day.
Yeah, I didn't mean to just interject everybody else's questions, but that kind of just came to mind, and I was like, I wonder how it differs between the two. So thank you for answering that. Kathleen.
Let me just say on that, because it's a really good topic. I know that a lot of people with MS feel that most of the medications that are for MS are geared towards people with relapsing remitting. Mm-hmm. And that is 100% correct. But physical therapy is for everybody with MS. I don't care what type of MS you have, I want to treat it.
Yeah, I've heard people over the last couple of years since started working with the foundation, especially people with more progressive forms of the disease, say that they kind of do feel like it is a little underserved as far as that's concerned. And I'm starting to see it, like there's not a lot of representation of them. Most commonly, when you're diagnosed it is relapsing remitting, it's rare to get diagnosed with a more aggressive form.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people with MS are rightly upset and frustrated that they're not getting more attention from medical management. That there's always seems to be a new medication coming down the pike for relapsing remitting, not quite so much for primary or secondary progressive.
Yeah. We do have a question from Facebook, Kathleen. She says, they say people over 65 don't need to take DMT. And what's your thought on this?
I think it's up to your physician. I know some people over 65 who do, and some who don't. Usually, if I have a handful of people who were diagnosed at a very at a relatively old age and they're not on DMTs. But if somebody is, say diagnosed at the age of say 55 or 60, and they start on DMTs, I don't think the doctor's going to take them off once they hit the age of 65. It's going to depend if the disease is actively if the medication is actively having anti-disease impact. And so if the physician feels confident that the DMTs are doing a credible job of preventing disease activity, then they're going to keep them on.
And do see that we have a few more people who have joined since the start. So I just want to let you guys know that if you do have any questions for Dr. Karpatkin and you are watching us from Zoom, please utilize the chat and Q&A features, or you can just raise your hand to speak directly to him and I'll unmute you. Vincent dropped another question into the chat. He says that he has great difficulty bending down to pick something up from the floor and that he has fallen, I'm assuming. He says he does utilize a gripper tool to help him pick things up when he does drop them on the floor, and wants to know if there are any exercises that you recommend so that he could prevent reliance on this gripper tool.
That's a great question. And again, that's a really common thing that I see with my patients. And what happens is it doesn't happen all at once. One day they're very comfortable reaching to the floor, and then one day they notice it's a bit of a strain, and a little bit later they notice they can reach only to about an inch from the floor, and then a few months later it's 2 inches. What I do in those cases is I make the exercise program reaching for the floor. So what do? I first try to find out how far can they comfortably reach. So say they can reach comfortably to about 6 inches from the floor. Well, I will put something about 5.5 inches from the floor and have them practice that. And once they get good at that, I'll move it down to 5 inches and practice that, and then 4.5, and then 4, etc. At the same time, I need to figure out why they're having trouble reaching to the floor. Is it a balance issue? Is it a flexibility issue? It's usually first a flexibility issue because their low back and their hamstrings are too tight. So I might give them stretching exercises for that. But once that is addressed, if they're having trouble reaching to the floor, I make them work really hard at reaching to the floor.
Maria says,
Vincent, you ask really good questions.
Yes. Maria says, many of us are getting or will get arthritis in time. Number one, regarding the joints in my hands, what are some PT exercises that are helpful? And two, what about a squeeze ball or stress ball for the hands?
Sure. So the most important thing is to keep using your hands. A squeeze ball or a stress ball is a good idea, but the problem is it only works in one direction. It works on the squeezing muscles, the muscles that help you make a fist, but it doesn't work against the opening muscles, the muscles that you use to come out of a fist. Okay, so what I see a lot of times is patients whose hands get really tight in a fisted position because they don't work on the other muscles. And there's a really good and very inexpensive exercise tool, and it's called a web hand exerciser. And imagine a tennis racket that you put your fingers through, and then you try to spread open your fingers, but instead of the strings of the tennis racket, there's elastic which you push against. And most of my patients have that to work on the muscles that open their hand. So squeezing a ball works fine for the muscles that make a fist, but if you think about the opposing muscle groups, you have to find a way to strengthen those muscles as well. So a web hand exerciser, you can get it for about $20 on Amazon, and most of my patients have them. They don't particularly like them, but they use them.
An anonymous attendee says, does Medicare cover physical therapy sessions as well as regular insurance?
Usually, yes. Some therapists don't like to take Medicare, but back when I had a private practice, I took Medicare, and uh, uh, I sometimes Medicare would take a long time to pay me, but they always did. So Medicare usually almost always covers PT. The more important thing is, this is a good jumping off point, is to make sure you find a therapist who has training in MS. Okay? Don't just go to any therapist. In the same way, when you look for a neurologist for your MS, you didn't go to a kidney doctor or a dermatologist. You look for a neurologist who specialized in MS. The same thing for physical therapists.
You just answered the next question. Someone else wanted to know if it's important to go to a physical therapist that specifically specializes in multiple sclerosis.
Right. Absolutely. And one thing I'd like to do is, one of the things I've done with the American Physical Therapy Association is to make something called a clinician locator map. And what we do is we try in every state of the United States to find therapists who specialize in a special neurologic condition like MS or Parkinson's or whatever. And so if any of you are having trouble finding an MS specialist, please, please, please contact me and let me help you find someone. We have people all over the United States. Most of them take insurance, but it's very important to find someone who has that training, who has the training in MS.
Is it all right if we drop your email address into the chat?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. Bhavia, if you can do that for Facebook, I can do it here in just a moment. So another question, someone wants to know what the best exercises are to improve flexibility.
Well, it's going to depend on what muscles of yours are inflexible. So usually for people with MS, the most commonly tight muscle is the calf muscle. And for that, you have to do a wall stretch, or it's also called a runner stretch. And if you don't know what that is, email me and I'll send you the information on it. It's a very easy stretch to do. The more important thing is not which exercise alone, but how much of every exercise. So I usually tell my patients, for every stretch that they want to do, consider holding it for 30 seconds for at least a couple minutes a day. At least a couple times a day, excuse me.
All right, I'm just getting your email address down. An anonymous attendee says, my abilities vary greatly from day to day, and even throughout the day. So I didn't think the physical therapy was benefiting me and was frustrating. Do you have any ideas on this?
I'd like to know why it wasn't benefiting you. Usually when that happens, it's because the therapist isn't probably doing the best kind of therapy for you. You should try to make sure that the therapy was being given by somebody who really understands MS. So very often a patient will come to me and they say, I saw a therapist before, but all they had me do was ride a stationary bike and lift weights. And it didn't really help me as much, it just got me tired. And my answer to that is, well, riding the stationary bike probably got you really good at riding a stationary bike. And lifting weights probably got you good at lifting weights. But if your problem is walking in balance, you need to practice walking in balance. If you're getting too fatigued, that probably means that the person was giving you too aggressive an exercise program. I usually try to make sure that at the end of my sessions, my patients are not fatigued and that they feel they could keep going. If you're too fatigued, that might be that it's because the therapist gave you too aggressive a program.
I think that same person says the therapist was not an MS specialist.
So once again, please reach out to me and let me find a specialist for you. It really is, you know what, let me share a really kind of a rough story. A couple years ago, many years ago, a patient came to see me with MS, and we worked for a bit, but then he said, Herb, I can't come back anymore. You're too far away and I don't want to travel. But don't worry, there's a place around the corner from me that does physical therapy, and they say they could treat me. And said, do they treat MS? I said, well, they said they do. So I told him good luck and reach out to me if I could ever be of any help. And a few weeks later, he was back in my office again. I said, what are you doing here? I thought you said you're going to go to that place around the corner. I said, well, I did. The first thing they did was put me in a heated pool. And as most of you probably know, heat is one of the worst things for most people with MS. And he got in the heated pool and he got worse and worse. And the therapist said, well, obviously you're too far gone to benefit from MS. And the problem wasn't that the patient was far gone. The problem was that the therapist was far gone. He didn't know anything about MS. He was on day one putting his patient in the heated pool. So he stayed with me and worked with me for a while. He fully recovered. But then I worked to find him a specialist who was near where he lived.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if you were going to continue.
I'm sorry.
Okay. So someone says, after walking, my legs get very tired and with terrible foot drop. I rest and my leg gets better for a while. It seems that if I lay out flat as I rest, I recover faster than when I'm sitting. Why would this be the case?
So your body runs on energy. And one of the sources of energy is electrical impulses going from your brain and spinal cord to your muscles. In MS, the demyelination prevents the traveling of those impulses from your brain and spinal cord to your muscles. The more energy you expend, the harder it gets. Also, the more energy you expend, the more your body heats up. Therefore, the more you rest, the less energy you expend and the more your body cools down. So your idea seems to me to be spot on. You exercise, you run out of gas, you stop and recover. Lying down is usually better than sitting, but not for everybody. Some of my patients, some of my research subjects say they prefer sitting. Lying down, they say it's harder to get up from lying down, so they don't like doing it.
So we've got a few more questions. I see 4. So
I have a hard stop at 5 o'clock because I have another talk to give. So
got it. Okay. So next question comes from an anonymous attendee. They say, my MS has caused my foot to lose strength and the muscles of my feet and the arches have fallen completely flat. Can anything be done to strengthen the muscles of my feet and ankles?
Well, it's hard to say without examining your foot, but I think one of the best exercises to strengthen a person's foot with MS is to make them balance on that foot. So what I will often have my patients with foot weakness do is to take their shoes and socks off so they're barefoot and then to practice balancing on that foot because you really use your foot muscles to maintain your balance. But, it's hard for me to tell, is the problem weakness, flexibility, loss of motor control, any of those?
Another question from that same attendee. They say the muscles surrounding the knees have weakened, causing them to hyperextend once or twice a day. Is there a specific exercise to help?
It's going to sound a little, so the short answer is yes. The hyperextension, by that I'm assuming you mean a snapping back of your knee. And you may find this a little hard to understand, but that usually is not a problem with the knees. It's usually a problem of tightness in your calf muscles. So if your knee is snapping back, when I have a patient whose knee is snapping back, one of the first things I do is work on stretching out their calf muscles. And the more stretched those calf muscles get, the less frequently their knee snaps back.
This person also says they have a difficult time lifting their legs, which results in them shuffling their feet as they walk. Is this an indication of weak hip flexors?
Without seeing you, I'm not sure. It could be weak hip flexors, it could be weak knee flexors, it could be weak ankle dorsiflexors.
Someone, Maria, actually, she asks, are you also trained for acupuncture and do you recommend it at times?
Oh boy. So first answer, no, I'm not trained. Second answer, I recently completed and published a study on acupuncture and MS. And we took a large number of people with MS and gave them acupuncture treatment, and then afterwards checked their strength and flexibility, balance, walking, sensation. And I gotta say, nobody showed any improvement. It could be that we didn't measure the right things. A lot of the patients said they felt better, but on clinical testing, there was no improvement. Now, I have a colleague who's an acupuncturist, and she would disagree with me and say acupuncture is wonderful for MS. I think of myself as a scientist, and I look at the evidence, I look at the data, and the data does not support the idea that acupuncture is useful for MS. It may be useful if people have pain due to the MS, but I rarely recommend it because I've done the research on it and I just haven't seen it improve. I wish it did work. That would be wonderful. You know, you just all you do is go somewhere and have someone put some needles in you and your symptoms get better. But I haven't seen it.
What about massage therapy? Barbara wants to know if it's helpful.
Massage therapy is going to promote relaxation, which is a good thing. If somebody has really tight muscles, it's a very helpful thing. If their limitations in balance and walking are due largely to tight muscles, then massage may help a little bit. But where I see the big advantage for massage is that it gives relaxation. And when you're relaxed, you use less energy. So I'm a fan of it for that, but there's no evidence that I know of that massage is going to change the track of MS.
And we've got another question in the Q&A. Someone asks, is it best to exercise daily for MS or every other day?
Daily. I would rather have you do a small amount of exercise every day than a larger amount every other day.
I don't see any more questions in the chat or Q&A. I don't know if Bhavya sees any on Facebook, but as far as I can tell, we've answered them all and we're just a few minutes shy of 5, so it's good timing. That is all the time we have for now. If you have missed any part of the conference, if you head over to the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation's Facebook page, the live stream recording will be available to watch from the beginning once we close out the conference here on Zoom. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for times and access information. This conference will also be available on the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation's YouTube channel within a few days. Our next conference will be on Tuesday, August 8th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Ben Thrower for another segment of Ask the MS Expert. And our sincere thanks to everybody who did attend and ask questions. And thank you so much, Dr. Karpatkin, for your time and answering everybody's questions. I'm glad we got through them.
It's been a pleasure. And one of the nice things about these talks I give is that very often people contact me afterwards with follow-up questions, and I'm more than happy to take them. Don't be shy. I'm actually a really nice guy, and so it's not a bother. Let me help you. Like I said, one of my goals in life is to get physical therapy to everybody with MS. So I'm going to say goodbye. I have another meeting to go to. Thank you again, MSF, for the opportunity, and hope to talk with you guys again real soon.